Hello everyone, welcome back to part 5 of the mystery of the bevel blocks. If you have not already, please check out the earlier episodes as I will be building upon concepts brought up in those videos. Now, before I begin, I would like to point out that I have a couple more albums here that I am starting. One is on the nubs themselves. I think we can focus on those independently of the bevel blocks, and that might lead us into some other interesting directions. And also, I want to look closer at some of these proposed wedge holes. These are the holes that are supposedly for splitting the rock into smaller pieces, which I'm going to have to agree that is what they are traditionally for, but we're going to see them in some interesting locations, especially in Egypt, interesting configurations. So I want to focus on those independently as well and see where that goes. Both of these are very new and in progress. I don't have much in there yet. I'm still focusing on the bevel blocks, but if you guys have any sites you want to recommend or any pictures you want to recommend, let me know. The knobs and nubs I've tried to give a little bit more attention to because I can easily transfer a lot of photos that I already have from the bevel block album. But there's a lot of South American stuff in there too. So let's get back to the list, and I have a news update for you guys as well. Okay guys, before we start the list, I wanted to do a couple of news updates for you guys from the other channels. Matt at Ancient Architects just uploaded a great video on the Tomb of Kenkawes, which we had just talked about in my Where I Stand video. He and I and Chuck at CFApps 7865 also, we are all kind of coming to the same conclusion on the structure and the structures around it. So I highly recommend everyone to check this one out, to check out Chuck's video that he just uploaded on the casing stones around the base of the pyramids and how some of them are actually bedrock carved and not stones, which is really interesting. I think that extends to all 3 pyramids actually. So lastly, I wanted to add that Charles Koss, he has a pretty good video that he put out recently, which it shows the Sphinx, and he proposes some of the same proposals that I claim, that the Sphinx was originally an older structure, and he points out some of the features of the Sphinx that might be indicative of an older structure underneath all of the repair blocks and conversion blocks. So I recommend all 3 of these videos. They are very, very good. They are my top-rated researchers. Also, I have found another really good picture here of the GCF1 structure, and this is the Kenkawes mastaba next to it. And I just wanted to point out to you guys how extremely eroded everything is. And on this side, you can see openings, and over here in the GCF1 structure, you see openings. Both of these structures have underground elements, and I don't believe anyone has documented the GCF1 internal passages. I find it interesting that in Charles Koss's recent video, he proposes that the Sphinx original structure may have been double peaked or twin peaked, kind of like the GCF1 structure is here. Now, I find it really compelling that ancient peoples could have just lopped off one of these, or if it was already broken, it would make it even more convenient, but lopped off one of these lobes on the end, refashioned the bedrock structure, added some blocks, worked the head some more, and you've got yourself a Sphinx, guys. I'm really, really sure here that what we're looking at is a similar structure to the pre-dynastic Sphinx, the bedrock Sphinx structure. And I believe it ties in with the function or the same construction project as the mastaba and perhaps many other features of the plateau. Also, a quick recap from the last episode. We left off at the Colaba temple in Egypt, and we had made the claim that due to what we see here, this physical evidence, this line of demarcation here that splits the bevel block constructions to smooth, finely dressed stones, but they are the same stones perhaps these were originally all bevel block, and it is almost as though a surface treatment has been done in a sweeping fashion across the entire structure. It's very strange to me why they stopped, and what the significance of this transition is. If this indicates handmade, hand-worked transition, or is this a sign of processing? I am compelled to think that this is some kind of sign of processing. It appears to have once been a straight line all the way down, and I don't know of any method that would just convert one to the other like this. It's very strange. It's almost like they had some kind of orbiting, grinding attachment implement that was able to face the surface of the stones, remove the bevels, which means remove about maybe an inch or so of material off the top, and to be able to do it very evenly, and the finish is all uniform on all the blocks. But what could do this abrupt stop? If this is the size of a person, they could only work so much at a time, and it's very strange that we see the processing just stops abruptly, and it's the whole wall. And also, I wanted to mention that the processing transitions, in some cases, across blocks. So it's not like they stopped at one block and worked it, or stopped at another block. They wanted a specific line, and if the blocks crossed over that line, it wasn't a big deal. It was all going to get processed the same. So that's very interesting to me, the placement of it and the very abrupt change. Now, I wanted to go look at some other pictures of Colaba Temple that I found. This is a close-up. I believe it is on the opposite wall. Again, we see varying capital styles. This one's very interesting. These elements and these elements, very lotus petal or mushroom even, very, very interesting styles and shapes here. All different, so we may be looking at more than 4 types of columns. The bevel blocks in the background, we see small filler stones. That's interesting. I'm not sure if this is just fractured pieces of bevel. I don't believe so. This appears to have its own bevel around the filler stones. Very, very interesting. Why bother to make this little piece and then add these pieces in later? All the filler stones and square holes at the corners are very interesting to me, and I really am puzzled by them. I don't know what their purpose could be. Again, here, maybe one across a block that sticks out. Why would there be a square hole in that? Very interesting, right? And there may be some signs of surface treatment. You can see the vertical lines, the scoring. Some different ones over here. These are almost pick-like, so perhaps different tools were used on the surface. Can't rule that out. Also, farther back, same area from up here, you can see the bevel blocks in this instance are on the interior of the structure, which is interesting because in most cases we see them on the outside and only the finely dressed on the inside, but here they extend to the inside of the structure. 3 different column capital styles, and the remnants of a cornice coping along the top. That's more than likely granite. So, found this interesting, and I wanted to compare the line of demarcation to the Mancow pyramid entrance. Here we see a similar line of demarcation from finely dressed to lumpy and nubby stones. They are the same stones all the way across. I find it interesting that this portion stayed together better than the rest of the casing stones. I'm going to propose that perhaps somehow the processing maybe helped to solidify this portion of the structure. Interesting thought. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I find it interesting that this is a very well-preserved piece. Now, if there was looting of this site, and people were still trying to access the insides and utilize it, they may have chosen to remove the other stones first and to leave these alone because of the significance of this area. That's also something to consider. Now you zoom in. This is a very big picture. We're going to zoom in even more in a second. But you see strange nubs here. See two nubs on one block and there's a lot of stones that have two nubs on one block. These areas appear to be indentations. Let's zoom in real close. These indentations remind me of some of the walls of South America, and I'm not the first person to make this connection. So again, we find this transition. It goes across blocks. That's very interesting. Sometimes right in the middle of a block. It didn't seem to matter. They just, as long as this area was flat, that's all they cared about. Very interesting, right? So, I think that's a pretty compelling case for a connection between the Mancow pyramid and the Colaba temple, and we may even see some more of this at other sites. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but as we go along, we might start making new discoveries. Like I said, with those arches, we're going to be finding all kinds of interesting hallmarks along the way, and if we all use our own attention to detail and our own scrutiny, we could probably work together and find some really interesting things about these sites that a lot of people have overlooked. So let's return to the list and continue on, because we have a lot to go through on that still. Okay, sorry guys, one more thing I want to add about the Colaba temple. Now, these artistic motifs here, these are classical cultural hallmarks of the Egyptian culture. Yes, the sun disk, the snakes, the wings, and even some of these stylistic elements. We assume that these are classical Egyptian cultural motifs. And I have to agree, I don't know any other thing that they could be. But I do find it interesting that the hieroglyphics are carved into these headers and lintels and into these pieces. And when I was looking really closely at some of the other pictures, I noticed that these headers are not done with the same motifs, but they have a similar, almost unfinished design here, almost like this was what they look like before they were finished off with the cultural motifs. Now, what does this imply? I'm not sure. Does this imply that the structure was not finished? I think that could be possible with the bevel line, and that the fact that not all of the structure was finally finished, if that was what they were going for, was a completely finely dressed structure. I can't be 100% about that. But I find the fact that these are just geometric. There is no cultural, artistic inscribings on them, yet the shapes are exactly the same as the one we just saw. So could the cultural, artistic motifs have been carved into these later? That is a very high possibility. But we do see that the weathering, the color appears to be the same. It is a very highly skilled execution. This is very well done, whoever did this. So it could be an original element, and this could have been the finished portion where the other versions were unfinished. That is something we cannot rule out. And I also find it interesting that the cornice stone here, it is actually a bevel block itself. See that? That's interesting. But it's just a surface treatment, a margin all the way around. There's no protruding or anything like that. It's flat, but there is a line of demarcation. That's interesting. So, what does this imply? I'm not sure. This looks like rock to me. It doesn't look like concrete. But at this point, I'm open to all possibilities here. So, let's move on. Okay, now we are back in Greece at the amphitheater of Andriaki at Myra. And what are we seeing right away? We are seeing nub blocks, square holes, and bevel blocks. More square holes, more bevel blocks. Now, I'm not sure about the artistic elements. I find that the detail and level of execution, similar to some of the artistic elements at Baalbek and other locations. We have already mentioned the columns at Colaba and how they can vary and how skilled those executions are. So I don't want to rule out the artistic elements as original. So let's just keep that in mind. The arches, they are more than likely original. This one is a bevel block arch. And we can see that the steps, the seats, they all themselves may be bevel block. So that's a very interesting site. The entire amphitheater may be a bevel block original construction. And then what does this say? What does this imply about other amphitheaters? And we will get into some other examples. Okay, next we are still in Myra, still at Andriaki, but this is the Granary. Now, this is a very interesting structure and has some really good evidence here. So, right away, bevel blocks, top to bottom. This is a bevel block structure. We see nubs. This is a nub on a bevel block. Now, square holes. And then these square holes, this is important. Now we can see the remnants of the cornice that continued along the top. So we know that in most instances when we see rows of square holes like these above doorways, that they are stylistic motifs that are decorative, nothing too extravagant or extraordinary. They're just architectural features, and they would be semi-functional, like I say, to, if it's raining, it would deflect some water off the edge of the structure. And it looks nice. It's a nice little artistic border. Breaks up the monotony of the structure. And also up here we see this piece. This appears to be an original element. The faceted shape, very interesting. As well as the coping stones along the top. Those also look to be original elements. Here you have a bevel block at the very top, polygonal, and the same coping stones along the top. So I believe this, what we are looking at, is a completely original structure here. More of the faceted shape there, repeated from here. Very interesting, right? Square hole, bottom of that window. Interesting. And I believe I have one more picture. Okay, here's a close-up of the same site, one of the bevel blocks, and Shermanator Osborne and I had a nice little discussion here in the comments. He thinks, and I am compelled to believe also, that this might be original artwork of the structure. And why he believes, and why I think he might have a case, is you can see the fresher rock, how much lighter it is. So the colors are the same, implying a similar age. And I wanted to focus on these chisel marks, these small chisel marks, and how they aren't only seen inside this block to execute the art, but it is also seen around the block as well, and it even extends into some of the other blocks surrounding it. So find that interesting. I think that the bevel below might have been recarved artistically, perhaps, since the other bevels are rough, and that might have been in preparation for carving a inscription. You notice that some portions are more eroded than others. I'm not sure the attributions here. This may be older, this may be a recarving. They appear to be the same characters repeated. N, P, H, maybe. I'm not sure. The T. So it could be, this could be a reinscribing of a later, or of an earlier inscription. And I find that the square holes framing this block are interesting, and the fact that this one is in the middle underneath. So I don't want to rule out the possibility that some of this artwork may be original to the structure. Some of it very well could have been carved into the structure later. We cannot rule that possibility out either. But it does look old, doesn't it? It looks pretty old, and if they did not do this originally, it was definitely a bevel block that was repurposed. You'll notice this portion is damaged, and the faces appear to have been defaced, or maybe that's just, heavy erosion on it. But I find that interesting. So let's move on. Now this one gets pretty controversial. This is the remains of an aqueduct. Cornices appear contemporary with the structure. This is at Tyana, Cappadocia in Turkey. And let's take a closer look here. Yes, we see the lower portions are bevel block. There are upper elements that are also bevel block that appear to be original, and they are in association with finely dressed, dry laid stones. Perhaps filler stones, small filler stones can be seen. Perhaps nubs as well. Square holes at corners. So this is very interesting, right? This calls into question polygonal elements. This calls into question a lot of aqueducts and to whom they are attributed. So we're going to see some more aqueducts coming up. A lot of the traditional Roman associated aqueducts. And we're going to have to keep an open mind when we look at those because, again, all these hallmarks, they're appearing again. So we just have to follow those. Let's go back. And another. Or no, this is the same spot. A different area of it, I believe. A different portion of it. And here you can see some of the upper elements are still in place. And this is important. It shows the channel cut in these harder stones. The water channel. There you go. More bevel blocks. The entire structure appears to be original. It can even stay together even when missing large portions of its structure. That is a tribute to the stability of the design and the execution of the builders. So, perhaps a nub on that block. That's interesting, right? So, again, it's in the details. It's all in the details. But we are seeing the hallmarks repeat. And this is another one. This is a gate. Now, if this is a I believe this is all a contemporary structure as well. This is Turkey again. The lower portion is bevel block. The upper portions are finely dressed, dry laid. Interesting polygonal elements here. See that? And these, I believe, would, if they fell out, would expose square holes. And I'm not sure if these are actually planters. This is just foliage probably growing on the top, but these are decorative cornices. And you can see the other decorative cornice similar to the style we saw at the Granary at Andriaki. And the arches are similar to the amphitheater at Andriaki. And we see this vertical element here, this triple motif. Now, this is a classically Greek associated motif. We're going to see this at a lot of Greek sites. But I want to focus on that because that is a repeating motif across a lot of these structures. And I don't want to rule out the possibility that that is an original artistic element from the original builders. So very interesting site. We may even have instances of two nubs on one block. Very interesting. Some other blocks have large margins, others smaller margins. Very interesting. And this one I love. This one, below the Tremenos of Trajanus, the Acropolis of Bergamo, Turkey. Look at this. Now, let's zoom in. Clearly, we have an older structure that was built upon and around. We see bevel blocks, and we see lots of holes. Now, these holes are very strange. They are not just square holes. These are heavily eroded. Maybe they were once square holes, but now they are heavily eroded holes. And it almost looks like outgassing. I don't want to say that for sure, but it does look like the structure outgassed, and it caused all these areas where gas escaped through cracks to enlarge areas. I know that sounds crazy, but it's just an interesting erosional feature, I guess you could say, of the structure, that these holes appear so heavily eroded. It's very interesting. We're going to see more of this later in other structures. Okay, next, we are still in Turkey. This is Baez Fort at Sardis. And look at this excavation. Look how far down it goes. Bevel blocks, square holes at corners again. It's interesting that there is a rougher foundation for this site. That's peculiar. You would think that the foundation would be of the same quality as the bevel blocks. This may imply a rebuilt structure. Not sure though. Possibility. It is interesting how each consecutive course goes in just a little bit, and that it is mirrored in the foundation. So I'm not 100% sure if we are looking at original or reconfigured, because you got to remember, these are like Legos, and you can simply move blocks around and put them together in other configurations. Next, still in Turkey, the Acropolis of Reconda, and I believe this is the only picture I could find. The only instance of them is this small section, but they are interesting. Lots of polygonal elements. It appears to have been hit by some kind of cataclysm. I would assume this is earthquake damage, the separation. But again, most of this is still tightly fitted, so some of these gaps may have been intentional, almost like relieving spaces for shock absorption for earthquakes. I've heard that mentioned by other researchers. There appears to be more of this style of construction going up the hill, so there may be more to this construction. If anybody knows any more or has any more pictures of this, I'd love to see them, and I'd love to hear more about that site. And I do apologize about the dog sounds. This is recorded early in the morning, and she's still asleep. Okay, this is also in Turkey. Now again, we see bevel blocks making up the foundation. We see arches that are finely dressed, dry laid. A nice chunky, hefty construction again, in association with these other blocks. It's interesting that we see them going down, perhaps implying more underground structures. Yes? Now, when it comes to the upper, was this marble, I assume, elements? Are we looking at original features of this site, or are we looking at later additions? I don't know, and I don't want to rule out the possibility that this could have been original. Some of these sites do have very interesting anomalies. Most of them can probably be easily explained through construction methods and for attaching other implements and artistic stylistic motifs. Of course, I'm open to that. But we do see other strange coincidences from the other sites, and if nothing else, the foundations of many of these sites are undeniably connected. That is at Bergamo, the Bergamo Acropolis. Now let's get into high strangeness. Now we are at the Acropolis, Athens, and we're going to see a lot of strange things at this site. So right away, you see all the nubs. And we have to zoom in to point out the fact that many stones that do not currently have nubs appeared to have had nubs in the past, and they have broken off. Some of them are in very good condition, but for these, if someone was to say it's a lifting aid, I could understand that. They are all in the center of the blocks, and if you were going to attach rope and tackle, and you were lowering these blocks into place, that would make sense. On these bigger foundation blocks that I believe are bevel blocks, I believe they are, they have the larger knobs, and one on either side, perhaps for lifting. I'm open to that. Some of the other stones do not have them. Others have them in lower areas. So, perhaps more nubs continue along the lower elements. Some old capitals here. A lot of old construction material here. Square holes along the top. You want to say that these are for cornices, and I'd be in agreement with you. Just like at the other sites, like Andriaki, we can see that remnants of those cornices still are attached, and if you search through some of the rubble, you may find pieces that would correspond. So very interesting, right? Next, the north wing of the Propylaea, still on the Acropolis. Now, they're not initially apparent, but you start zooming in, you start seeing bevel blocks, nubs, maybe larger knobs, nubs, perhaps larger knobs. Very interesting, right? So, I'm not sure about the structure in the foreground. It's very tightly fitted and precision executed. They are all finely dressed, evenly dressed. The stone appears to be a hard stone, like a marble. You can see the grain. Let's see. Well, this might be a hallmark example of foliage growing out of a square hole, and perhaps this little bush too. You see other square indentations that appear to be anomalous. This one goes over 2 blocks, I believe, and this one as well. These may actually be clamps, metal clamps. I'm almost certain of it. Yes, I think these are clamps for holding the structure together. Secondarily, or originally, I'm not sure. They don't appear anywhere else. I'm compelled to believe these are a repair effort or a restoration effort. We do see other square holes though over here. This may be an original construction. See more square indentations, very strange ones. This is weird, this little scooped out part that goes between 2 blocks, that may be damage from anything really, musket, rifle fire, who knows. So there are anomalies to even the traditional classic structures. Again, square nubs, and another one there, maybe a broken off one there. Some other ones don't appear to have had nubs. Perhaps with better quality photos we might see remnants, but this pattern appears to be maybe random. Maybe there was a decorative element that went along with that. This line is interesting. That goes across blocks. That's a like another demarcation line like we saw at the Colaba temple. Bevel blocks. Other square holes, strange ones here, another one at a corner, center, and the other corners. Very interesting. None of the other blocks have these. Again, we see the triple motif at the top, like we saw in Turkey and Andriaki. We're going to see this a lot of other places. This is a classically attributed, a Greek motif, as with the columns. This is the Doric style, the simple style. You have Doric, then you have Ionic, which is the double scroll style, and then the Corinthian, which is the very flowery, elaborate capitals. But I believe at least portions of this structure are bevel block. We have to understand this site has been heavily repaired and perhaps reconfigured over time. That's an interesting block up there. Is that a channel maybe for water, like a gutter system? These other, sorry, my zoom box is in the way, but yeah, these other blocks at the top with these grooves in them, that's interesting. Maybe a square hole in one of the upper ones. Again, around here you see the foliage. Perhaps some of those are square holes. I'm going to have to assume that everything is contemporary, that the columns are original. We see maybe square hole anomalies in those, square indentations. We see square holes in the back that more than likely are for attaching cornices or architectural, structural pieces. But other square holes are anomalous, like this one. Yeah, that's very anomalous. So we'll get into a little bit more of the history and some of the geometry of the site. But there's a lot to think about at the Acropolis. There's a lot more going on than what people are noticing. So we'll go to one of the more famous pictures, and we'll probably close up because this video is getting really long. But this is probably the most controversial claim we're going to make so far. But guys, I think this is bevel block down here, and I think some of the instances of foliage are square holes. Now, this site has a long history. It has been repaired many times. Recently as well, there's one repair effort that I think just finished a few years ago. Elements have been taken away. The friezes, for example, have been taken to museums. I don't know who to attribute those artistic elements to. The triple motif again. We're going to see this a lot more places. And the columns are very impressive. They have interesting features to them. For example, the outer corners columns are bigger than the other ones in the rows. They are closer than the others in the rows. The columns themselves swell out so that when fluted, they optically, visually still appear straight. That's an interesting feature. And like Sacred Geometry Decoded points out, that a lot of the levels and connections of these stones are not perfect. They all it's more geometric, or like a jigsaw puzzle, more polygonal almost. So there isn't really a straight line or a level surface in this whole structure. It just which implies that this structure kind of just rose how it had to, or you can make all kinds of claims about the reasons for it. Structural integrity, strength, resistance to earthquakes, I believe, was one hypothesis. And you can see the kind of equipment we need today to even attempt to repair some of these structures. So I think we'll close it up here, guys. We're going to look at some more places in Greece coming up. Maybe that's a square hole. But we're going to see more of these hallmarks at more sites. Some of them are going to get pretty controversial. Again, I'm going to need your help to debunk them if they are bogus. But we're just going to keep soldiering on through the list. And perhaps we're going to find some more anomalies, some things that even I didn't notice the first time, like those arches. Your insights, guys, have been really helpful, and I think working together, we're gonna solve a lot of these mysteries, and we might even open up a lot of new mysteries. So stay tuned, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning. And from me and my sleepy dog, this is Ancient History Criticism signing off till maybe tomorrow. We'll continue and maybe try to get a video out every other day, since this is a bit time consuming. So thank you guys again for hanging out with me this morning. Talk to you later. Bye.